So Adam Smith, and the interaction of supply and demand, what did he call this? That would find that equilibrium price. What did he call that? What was that called? Yes. Well, he claimed, this was the idealized version of a free market. Yeah. The invisible hand of the market will find that equilibrium. Will find that equilibrium of price. But this was idealized world. So that is the market. It will find this price for the right amount of goods. Companies, if there's too many companies, some will go out of business. So this is very, 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 very cutthroat. Essentially, very cutthroat. And so we had the risk. This is all stuff I did on Friday. Don't forget marginal profit, and the cost is a big issue. So I think we got right to about here on Friday. The competition, he said, I talked about divisional labor and pins, and didn't I talk about that in class? I'm a little off each period, that's the way it goes. And the competition and self-interest guide. Of course, that implies that everyone's always going to make the same rational decisions. And since we are human, we only make rational decisions. That it's for the absolute best for ourselves. And his idealized system should be, okay, laissez-faire, but anglified to laissez-faire. But it's laissez-faire, which means hands-off by government. Because to his context, see things like the Tea Act, governments only supported big business, only supported monopolies. And that's me, in my experience, meeting militiamen in Jordan, Montana, who would be on CNN for not paying taxes. I told this the other period. I think I told third. Did I tell you this period? My summer job all through college was delivering beer. Did you know that? Have you heard us talk about that? I deliver beer. Good summer job. Okay, it paid well, hard work. But yeah, these guys sit around in this Stockman's bar in Jordan, complain about the government, even though they're all getting government checks. And they would turn out to be on CNN for not paying taxes because they hold up and have this big standoff. Montana then became known as the state with free men and Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber. It's like, yay, Montana. And things really haven't changed too much, have they? But as they saw, if government didn't help just a few companies control entire markets, that will allow for other companies, other people to come in. That will allow for better products. That will allow for more consumer choice, AKA, it will lead to competition. Now, the problem, and Adam Smith saw this, is that this is when all things being equal. When everything is, there's no one company that has a big advantage. All things being equal, but big changes everything. What if somebody already controls the market? What if somebody already controls? It's hard to enter a market if somebody already does. So the thing about it is most people, when they think about Adam Smith, and try to talk about him to this day, because he was brilliant at putting these different ideas together, they stop it right here at laissez-faire. They don't get to the rest of Adam Smith. And one more thing about Adam Smith, he wrote this in 1776. The whole world was literally changing, in Britain first, then the US, that whole Industrial Revolution thing. He only saw the beginning of it because of course, this. That's his grave in Edinburgh. Yes, I made the pilgrimage. I had to go see his grave. That's the day that I did not buy a 200-pound kilt, not 200 pounds, actual weight, and I ate haggis. Hold up.
Wait, you said you didn't buy the kilt?
I was going to, and my wife said, when are you ever going to wear a kilt?
You can always wear a kilt.
I know, that's what I said, but she said, you'll never wear this kilt. And it was 200 pounds, that's about $350 then. I know. Kilts.
That's not even that bad.
All things being equal. But yeah, you know what? Sounds. Do you know what haggis is? Yeah, sheep's stomach with the various innards mixed in with spices. And it's like a very traditional Scottish meal, and so being tourists, we had to eat it. And the waitress came and brought us our food, and she said, only servants eat this, or I'm sorry, only tourists eat this. Nobody in Scotland eats this stuff anymore. I tried it. Never again. All right, so now, what we have, though, is a brand new economy was being created. Something that's brand new. Capitalism. Capitalism is a market economy. And to add and skip, it works best if it's a free market, but it has some issues there. Sorry, I got some... Okay, thought I got a message. It's a market economy, and it has two very distinct classes. There's always been classes before, but this is where it's not just as social classes. This is economic classes, two very distinct. And it's because of the dominance of machines and the means of production. You have the capitalist, okay, Paul McCartney. Oh, I literally just shut off the whole thing. The capitalists, and they're the ones who own the machines. I got it ready to restart. How did they do that? The capitalists. And sometimes you see them called the bourgeoisie, which means middle class. I define that, people who have to work, but afford some of the trappings. And so the first of these shopkeepers and merchants were bourgeoisie. And they take the risk. So they have to take the risk to buy the machines. And that includes the innovation, or at least buying the innovation, putting a lot of money into the innovation. Because capital is incredibly expensive. So if you go out of business, you lose everything. But they get all the profit. All of it. They own the machines, they get the profit. And this is significantly different. I'll explain more in a bit, and this is from a magazine called Punch. These are robber barons, which were the capitalists of the Gilded Age, like the 1890s. And everyone's bowing down to them, politicians, farmers, workers. Here are sweatshop workers, laborers. And they're also, you'll see them called the proletariat. And this comes from a lot of writing, best known by two men by the name of Marx and Engels. But proletariat, and that comes from ancient Rome, and just a lower class. But they're the workers, and they rely upon wages. And yes, there were something called wages before, but it was different before capitalism. Wages were decided different, they had a different point of view about it. And this is a revolutionary new world. When we think about things like wages and hourly wages, or for that matter, vacation time or retirement, that did not exist before the Industrial Revolution. It would have been totally foreign. And so, two distinct classes. It is a market, but it's reliant upon those who have the machines. And are there going to be more capitalists or laborers? Yeah, about 99 to 1. Because by definition, most people cannot afford the capital. And even if somebody is innovative, creative, they either can't afford the capital or other things happen, well, there's only going to be a relatively small amount of capitalists. I mean, how many car companies can there really be? Most people cannot go out and say, I'm going to start an airline. It doesn't quite work that way. Because think of the money and power you have to have before you ever do that. And so with that, this is where laissez-faire, and Smith saw it, but he only just seen a textile mill. It was so new. So in laissez-faire and capitalism, and what he said is let the market decide. And let's be very clear, he didn't particularly like merchants. He called them, in their natural selfishness and rapacity, business people are led by the invisible hand, and thus without intending it, without knowing it, advance the interests of society. So we've got businessmen acting in their self-interest, all things being equal, will do what's best. Yet he does call them selfish and evil. He doesn't trust them. It's not rich people. Merchants, the capitalists. He didn't particularly like the wealthy landlords either, though. So maybe it was all of them. He didn't trust them. So we'll let the market decide, that invisible hand. But there's a few issues with capitalism that would change that equation. Capitalists, they own the machines, and that is a huge cost. And remember, marginal profit is the difference between revenues and cost. Machines a massive cost. And therefore, that is going to lead to something that goes from the very beginning of the market. There's more risk. You get the profit, but you could go bankrupt. Or as they would have said then, receivership. And so there's a lot of risk. There's more risk in capitalism than there is in previous market economies. Pre-capitalist. Just a lot more risk because there's a lot more to lose. Which, by the way, doesn't that even limit, again, what kind of people can actually become a capitalist? Because most people can't afford to lose much. Because they don't have very much in the first place. And I don't know why the font is so small there, but workers now to operate the machines is going to be a cost. So not only have the cost of the machine, and whatever the machine may be. You're in a bank, the capital's money, but it's still, you have to have that. Workers are a cost. But where does that cost come from? Pay would be radically different in this new system. And they would have a name for it, called the wage system. Radically different. Pay would be decided different. All of it would be different. Now you have to bring somebody to that new thing called a factory and work there. Operate your machines instead of being independent workers who worked on their own time. And there's something else. What's going to decide wages then in this new system? Where it's no longer individuals doing the work, but now different capitalists are competing for workers. What decides wages in this new system? Let me give you a question. If profits go up, what happens to wages?
I mean, they could go up, but they'll probably stay the same because people are employees, they don't need to be.
Profits only go to whom? So if profits go up, who gets the profit? It has no effect. Profits have no direct effect on wages. Now you might say, wait a second, if you lose money, you got to cut your wages. If you lose money and cut your wages, what's going to happen to your workers? Another company will scoop them up. You can have a situation where profits are actually going down and wages are going up. And that's not necessarily bad for the whole country, but you can see how that could be kind of bad for the capitalists themselves. If profits go up, wages can drop. And that happens all the time. So let's say you're skilled. You have a skill. What happens to your wages?
Well, you hope they go up. Yeah, you hope they go up, but if your skill isn't really useful, then it's probably going to be.
Well, what if it is useful? But what if everybody else has the same skill?
Then it's not.
Skill doesn't matter unless that skill's in demand. Skill doesn't matter unless it's in demand. And then there better be a shortage of those workers. How about hard work? Let me tell you what decides wages, and then we'll get back to the hard work, because this is actually really shocking. What decides wages then? If it only matters, if profits go up, doesn't affect wages. Profits go down, doesn't directly affect wages. Skill doesn't directly affect. Well, I'll ask you, hard work, does hard work affect it? Who's had a job where they haven't worked in someplace you had to fill out a W-2, get a W-4, do taxes, and they just had to work with other people? A few of you have? What's your pay based on? Huh. So have you seen people around there who don't do a darn thing, or maybe you're that person who doesn't do anything, and you get paid the same as everybody else, don't you? Hard work doesn't matter. Don't get me wrong. If there's a surplus of workers and you're lazy, they can always just replace you real fast. But if there's a lot of people out there that are working their tail off, what affects wages? It's set by the market, the supply and demand for workers. And if there's high demand for workers and not very many of them, or not very many in that skill, it goes up. So you look at jobs that do have, there's a skill that gets a higher wage, it's because there's not that many of them. And you can see it in things like, one of the big ones is like computer, like programming and that, coding. 20 years ago, that was in great demand. Now, God, they're coming out of the woodwork. It doesn't mean it's a bad job. But pay is stagnant. Pay's not going up. I mean, they're everywhere. And there are some jobs there's going to be desperate demand, but there's some that just not. Yeah.
Isn't school supposed to be teaching us for jobs in the future? But then also you said before that it's like this big system used for factory workers. So how can both of those things be true?
Or maybe it doesn't function the way it probably should. The best way to teach it for the future is to teach you to be thinking, questioning people so you can adapt and change. Because the odds are many of the things that would be in demand now might not be in demand 20 years from now. And the things that are most demand now don't require college diplomas. In fact, of the top 10 jobs that are going to be in demand, that are in demand right now, only 2 require college diplomas. Nursing and teaching. There's just a desperate shortage of teachers. No, I'm not saying teaching is an interesting gig, but and nursing is incredibly difficult, but most jobs don't require college diplomas. Let alone, so it's complex. Can you see being upset by this? And that's the system, and it's still this way today. It is the way it is today. And it is a little frustrating. You know, whether or not, you know, from my own personal job, I'm paid the same as other people with my number of years of service. That could be good or bad. I could be a bad teacher or a good teacher, but we're all paid the same. And no, I don't know a better way to do it because it's really hard to say who is good or who's bad. But this is why people are going to be really, they're going to fight this and fight this. The capitalists would win. We just all accept it, right? You're going to work for a wage. And that's the system. But this is going to be a massive fight. And so with that, competition equals, we have competition in the labor market. Wages go up. That's a big risk for companies. If somebody comes into the market and undercuts your price, that's a big risk. New machines come out you can't afford. New risk. Heck, just one bad decision, more risk. There's so much risk and competition is the biggie. This is cutthroat. With capitalism, with all the risk to buy, you go out of business, you could lose everything, technically. And so with that, we're talking about this new world that's being created with risk, and then the workers' risk. There's something else, I almost forgot to say this. Part of the reason the wage system is so different is before the Industrial Revolution, I'm not saying things weren't really hard, but you worked on your own. You did it. You did the work at home. You did it in your own shop. You did it in your own farm. You did it. In this new system, more and more, to earn a wage, you gotta have, the people with the machines have got to be hired. And if they don't hire you, you starve. And that is radically different. If they're not hiring, you don't have a job. It wasn't like that before. And make sure you get that down or get something like that down. They've got to hire. And that's a big deal. Something called unemployment will be a brand new thing. And it will hit for the first time in the first financial panic of this era in 1819. 1837 will be a catastrophe. If the capitalists aren't hiring, you don't have a job. And you can say, well, there's jobs in, I'm just throwing a state out here, Florida. Yeah, but we're here. And it's really hard to go there. Can't just go. It was harder then, it's harder now. Especially if you have a family and a home and debts to pay. So with that, competition is risk. It's all risk in here. So what does everybody want to do? Limit the risk. The workers want to sound pain. They want to make sure that they have some kind of pay and benefits. But for the capitalists, they want to limit the competition. You get rid of the competition, you limit the risk. You get rid of the competition, your price, your cost can drop. Or your revenues can go up, depending on what you do. And therefore, here's the big iron rule of economics. Put an asterisk by it, a star, italicize it, underline it, circle it. What else can we do? Highlight it, put it in bold, new font. Economies of scale, and it's all about risk. What's economies of scale? Scale is about size. And when there's a lot of risk in competition, if there's a competition between two entities, win or lose, a lot of risk. Who has the advantage? Scale means big. Big always has a competitive advantage. So make sure you put that down next to it. The big has a competitive advantage. They produce more. They can have more division of labor. The big become more efficient. The big can cut costs. Big, all things being equal, are more efficient. And therefore, if they're more efficient, their costs drop. And if their cost drops, they can drop their prices and undercut their less efficient competitors, yet still make money. The big always have a competitive advantage. Always. Now, they can blow it, and they can do dumb things. In the 1970s, American auto companies were the big of the big. General Motors was the biggest corporation in the world, and they blew their advantage by dumb moves. Most of their moves were to try to hurt workers and to make as much money as possible. And they've never recovered. And you go to Detroit, you know what I'm talking about. Now also fits in. So they went. They still have money, but they went out of business, and the wage system broke down in Detroit. But big have the advantage, always. And if you don't believe me, think about how hard it would be to start a grocery store and start it next to Walmart. See how long you last. A minute? Heck, you wouldn't even get the doors open. You couldn't compete. Walmart is big, efficient, have a whole supply chain set up, and just can't do it. And so with that, economies of scale. So what do capitalists want to create? The biggest. They want to get the biggest they can get. And what do they want to create? What do we call it? Ideally, if you get rid of the competition and get big, what is it called? A monopoly. Or something that acts like a monopoly. You get companies kind of operating together. It's called an oligopoly or a pool or a trust. You want to create a monopoly. So you don't have to worry about risk. And so there's always this desire to get big. And big has a competitive advantage. Adam Smith was writing all of this saying all things being relatively equal. Well, all things aren't equal. All things are not equal. And so therefore, there's a lot of issues here. The market, by its very definition, promotes inequality. That's not necessarily a bad thing. You see somebody do well and have a nice house and a car, whatever you might want. You think, I want to work harder and get that. But at the same time, because big wins, it will focus wealth and power to the big because they have a competitive advantage. Now, that means, so what we're talking about now is what are the rules? And if big get bigger, what does that do to demand? If money flows to the big, which it does, because they have a competitive advantage, just the way it is, what happens to demand for goods? What's that? If money flows to the top, what happens to the vast number of people who have to buy stuff? They have less money. Demand drops. It's just math. That one's a math. So capitalism is this amazing engine for innovation and creation of wealth. But it has this bad tendency to hit demand. In fact, economists have a name for it. it kills demand, capitalism eats itself. And they have a name for it. Economists call it, and I think it's hilarious, it's called secular stagnation. I don't even know. What? It's where there's low demand. There's perpetual low demand because wealth is flowing to the top, inequalities. But don't forget, you have this system that creates all these amazing products because it encourages innovation, yet it rewards big. So who benefits from laissez-faire and hands-off? The big. And Adam Smith knew this. If you have a system where you don't mess with competition, the big will win. And if the big win, you're promoting monopolies. Now, I was just reading an article about the iPhone 12. And it's just coming out, and it's like $1,000 or something. That sound about right? I don't know the exact amount. All I know is this: it's not cheap, and there's virtually no new innovation on it. Just a few things. Why would they ever want to innovate too much? That's expensive. Exactly, they can make money, and there are people who go out and immediately buy the new iPhone. I have a couple friends that they buy the new one once it comes out. It's kind of their status symbol. How many companies make cell phones now? 2.5, because Google's kind of, yeah. So, this is what Smith said. There is a role for government, and it's anti-monopoly. If you don't allow for monopolies, that'll allow for competition. In the weird vernacular of the 1890s, this is called antitrust. And the US would pass a law, it's a convoluted, hard to follow law, called the Sherman Antitrust Act. Most people are anti-monopoly, but they don't know that antitrust is anti-monopoly. You're in a small town, you know what monopolies are. But this is from Adam Smith. And no one really read that part. They don't read Smith talking about the role of government, they just read laissez-faire. He said, no, you can have laissez-faire as long as there's no monopolies. I should add, when I was your age, the country was still pretty anti-monopoly. Now it's not at all. We are controlled by monopolies. And their desire is to get big. You can blame the company and say, how dare you be so greedy? But let's be honest. Isn't that what companies are supposed to do? If you allow them to do what they naturally do, they will try to dominate the market. I mean, Amazon, it's a direct trend line. You allow them and encourage them and give them tax benefit to take over the market, guess what they're going to do? Yeah, they're going to do it. And so this is a rule. This is what we call a regulation. So with that, who are the socialists? Socialists, another product of the Industrial Revolution, and they said that capitalism was flawed. Some said give workers more power and a few more things to solve the problem. Some socialists are like, let's blow the whole thing up and create a perfect classless society. We'll talk more about this a little bit later. By the way, what do you call socialists who want to blow the whole thing up and create a classless society? They're called anarchists. They don't want anarchy, but they just want to blow up the old system. That's an anarchist. Anarchists are socialists. There's all kinds of socialists. There's all kinds, including like you go to Scandinavia or Germany or France. They're very, 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 very moderate socialists. The U.S. has socialist elements in it, a few little things like you're sitting in one. That's cool. So here's the first a cartoon. I just thought this was funny. Attack of the Invisible Hand of the Free Market. And I just thought the hand with the eyeball. I just thought that was funny. And then you can't read the cartoon of these two guys, but it says, if you can't see it, there it is again, the invisible hand of the marketplace giving us the finger. Okay, so with that, what this does lead to is a pretty big, or it really affects the distribution of wealth. And wealth in capitalism funnels to the top. But that's to be expected. Big has the competitive advantage. And once again, some wealth flowing to the top is not necessarily bad, because that will encourage people to innovate and do more, because I want to get that lifestyle too. But if too much flows, it's secular stagnation. And I said this the other day, so you heard me online. It's really hard to figure out what wealth is. You know, if you sell a pile of cash, okay, we figure wealth out. But there's all kinds of wealth in land. It depends what the value of land is. Or what if you buy fine art? And I pointed this out in class, that beautiful work of art behind you, with Tobias Funke floating in that blue field. I mean, who could put a value on that kind of art? Can you put value on that? It's impossible. It's priceless. You know what that is?
No sleep paralysis, Steven?
Huh?
No sleep paralysis, Steven? That's what it looks like.
It's Tobias Funke. He's a blue man. Yes.
Did you buy that though?
No.
It looks like.
I didn't buy it, but it's still priceless. Huh? A student gave that to me. Found it, and then made that for me. Well, it's fine work of art. You can't put prices on it. But no, but you really actually can't. Even if, let's say, it was a Rembrandt, which it's really not. You know what that is? So I told a student a few years ago that I like this show that's actually now getting relatively old, but called Arrested Development. And that's a character from Arrested Development. You have not seen Arrested Development. I feel sorry. Okay, but this has the big growth in wealth from early capitalism in the United States. And this is the wealth of the top 1%, Civil War, Reconstruction, and then it went way up here. Here it's conscious policy to equalize, to move the bottom up. When that went away in 1980, you can see it start going up towards 2000. This one's even more stark. This is the wealth of the top 0.1%. And how it's about 25% with the beginning of the Great Depression. Conscious policy to equalize the wealth. When that went away, it's going up to here. It's probably about 35% now. And so the point about that is, whatever about the wealth, whatever about the individuals, that means there's less money for other people to buy stuff. And so let's jump right to this. And that leads to a new economic program called laissez-faire economics. And this is very much influenced by Alexander Hamilton, who wanted to help merchants, give them money and power so they build more factories. And first off, hands-off competition. That's laissez-faire. Hands-off. Well, let companies compete whatever way they want. But because of economies of scale, this by definition helps the big. If the big are allowed to do whatever they want, they will dominate because that is basically gravity. Next. Oh, I'm sorry. And then massive government aid for business. Or at least one of them. Tariff, huge government aid. A gold standard, huge government aid for business. Building roads and bridges, etc. So help, not all businesses, and then let them do whatever they want with the wealth. We'll see this with railroads. Once again, that's not necessarily good or bad, but it's not really true laissez-faire. They call it laissez-faire, but it's direct government aid. Next, allow for immigration. Open immigration. Now, the U.S. wanted people, citizens of the country, so allowed in immigration. But in the short run, a mass of new workers does what to wages? Yeah, because it's a big supply. Now, in the long run, it actually might raise wages, but it also does something else. It increases the size of the market to buy goods. All these people come in, they buy stuff. Doesn't that help business? And also, people from other countries bring in innovation. I mean, it comes in from a lot of different ways, but the one we see it the most is in food. How immigration has so totally changed what food. I mean, I can still remember this exotic Mexican restaurant that started in 1973 called Taco Bell. And that's actually true when it's labeled as an exotic restaurant, and that makes me laugh heartily. But, and then this is why this Henry Clay's American System program will be so heavily debated. Tariff, bus, internal improvements. This is all government aid. And once again, the whole idea is put money to the hands of the wealthy, and they will promote wealth. And then workers will get money because they will be all these new factory jobs. I should add, by the 1920s, they would call this trickle down. Make sense? The wealth trickle down. That'll get bad connotations in the Great Depression because it was a Great Depression. And this is, like Hamilton was, the beginnings and by the late end of the century into the 20th century through today, they're kind of the roots of conservative economics. I mean, you get some elements that would change, like when tariffs are still bitterly debated. But that's laissez-faire, and that gets to the last factor. This is a totally new world. And lastly, we have a whole new economy then. This radically changes not only how people make a living, businesses, but the bells. And we must obey the bells, right? I know all of you want to stay here and hang out with me, but it's hammer time. Okay, so there's a quiz. It is dropped. 48 questions. Most of them are uphill. Good luck with it. Good morning. It's still morning, isn't it? Yes. Put it on the desk. Now, see, it's always hammer time in here.